Welcome back, everybody, to the deep dive. Today, we're going to be tackling something that's certainly very relevant for everybody today,
Yeah,
and that's media and political polarization.
big one.
It's a huge topic. We've
Mm.
got a stack of research articles here,
Oh, yeah.
a real rabbit hole, but we're going to pull out the most fascinating insights for you.
That's the fun part.
So to start off, what is political polarization?
Right. Well, you know, it's not just about disagreeing on politics.
Right.
It's about those disagreements becoming more extreme.
Okay.
And even more importantly, I think it's about the feelings involved. The distrust,
Yeah.
the dislike towards people on the quote-unquote other side.
Yeah.
So that's where affective polarization comes in.
So we've got two types of polarization here. Ideological,
Mm.
which is the growing gap between different political beliefs,
Right.
and affective,
Mm.
which is all about those heated emotions.
Yeah, feelings.
And what's really striking is that research on this topic has exploded, especially after 2012.
It's been a hot minute.
There's been a surge of studies, especially those focused on the United States.
Well, that makes sense, considering the political climate.
Yeah.
But it does make you wonder if we're getting a U.S.-centric view of this phenomenon.
Okay.
Because media systems and even what, quote, polarization, unquote, means can be quite different around the world.
It's like trying to understand global weather patterns by only looking at one city. But speaking of needing more clarity,
Oh.
we found something surprising about the research itself.
Okay.
A lot of studies don't consistently define or measure polarization.
Right?
Some use broad ideology scales,
Like,
while others focus on specific issues,
Right.
making it really tough to compare results.
that makes sense. It's like comparing apples and oranges. If
Exactly.
we can't agree on what we're measuring, it becomes almost impossible to get a clear picture of
Yeah.
the problem, let alone find solutions.
So is media content actually more polarized than ever? The research seems to suggest that both social and traditional media are becoming increasingly partisan.
Yeah. I mean, one study we looked at found a stark contrast between Fox News, which was highly polarized,
Okay.
and NBC, which wasn't.
Interesting.
Does that resonate with your experience with those outlets?
It does. I'm curious, though, couldn't you argue that all news channels have some degree of bias?
Of course.
How do we differentiate bias from actual polarization?
That's an important distinction.
Right.
Bias can be subtle,
Right.
while polarization is about pushing those biases to the extreme.
Okay.
And what's even more interesting is that politicians, using more polarizing language, seem to get more attention.
Really?
Yeah, it makes you wonder if polarization is a deliberate tactic to
Interesting.
grab eyeballs and gain support.
It's a bit unsettling, isn't it? Almost like a cynical game.
Right.
And that brings us to the next question. Does exposure to this kind of media actually fuel the fire?
Well, studies on selective exposure suggest that consuming like-minded media,
Okay.
whether it's social media or traditional news,
Yeah.
makes people more polarized, both ideologically and effectively.
Interesting.
It's like reinforcing those biases in an echo chamber.
But what about when we're exposed to viewpoints we disagree with? Shouldn't that help broaden our perspectives?
You would think so,
Yeah.
but it's not that simple, unfortunately.
Oh.
While some studies show that counter-attitudinal media can reduce polarization,
Okay.
others suggest it can backfire. Sometimes encountering information that challenges our deeply held beliefs
Yeah.
can make us dig in our heels even more.
Oh, so it's like we're wired to resist anything that challenges our worldview. But how can we be sure media is causing these effects, not just correlating with them?
That's where experiments come in.
Okay.
Researchers have designed studies to specifically manipulate media content and measure its impact.
Okay, give us an example. What kind of experiments are we talking about?
Well, one study exposed participants to uncivil comments on Facebook,
Okay.
and that actually increased their polarization.
Wow.
On the other hand, another study found that deactivating Facebook led to decreased polarization.
Yeah.
It seems stepping away from the constant flow of political content, especially the inflammatory stuff,
Right.
can cool things down.
So maybe a digital detox isn't such a bad idea, but honestly, some of these findings are a bit unnerving.
Yeah.
There was one in particular that really stood out to me.
Which one?
This study suggesting that simply covering polarization in the news can make people more polarized.
Oh, yeah, that's a tough one. Talk about a vicious cycle.
It's like by reporting on these divisions, the media might be inadvertently making them worse.
It is almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. It raises some serious questions about how journalists approach these topics.
Yeah.
But, and this is important, there were a few glimmers of hope.
You mean research on depolarization? I have to admit, it felt like most of what we read focused on the negative.
Yeah, you're right. The focus has been heavily skewed towards the problems.
Hmm.
But a few studies have explored ways media could help bridge divides.
Okay.
And some of the findings are promising.
Okay, I'm all ears. Tell me about these promising findings.
All right. So one study found that exposing people to diverse viewpoints,
Okay.
especially through personal stories rather than just facts and figures,
Right.
showed potential in reducing affective polarization.
So it's about humanizing the other side, letting people connect on a personal level instead of just throwing facts at each other.
That seems to be the case. Facts are important.
Facts are important, but they don't always change hearts and minds.
They don't.
But given all we've discussed, it sounds like we're caught in this loop.
It does a bit. A bit of a whirlpool.
A polarized media landscape, feeding into our tendency to seek out information that confirms our existing views,
Right.
which in turn makes us more extreme, making the media even more polarized, and so on.
And to add another layer of complexity, even talking about polarization can make it worse.
Really?
The media's coverage of the issue itself can further fuel those divisions.
So where does that leave us? It feels a bit overwhelming.
I understand that feeling. But remember, you're not powerless. You have the ability to choose how you engage with media.
Okay.
You could be aware of your own biases,
Yeah.
seek out diverse perspectives,
Right.
and engage in respectful dialogue, even with people you disagree with.
So it's about being more than just passive consumers of media. We need to be active participants in shaping our own understanding of the world.
Exactly. Think critically. Question your assumptions. Don't shy away from challenging ideas.
Which, let's be honest, is easier said than done. Especially when it feels like everyone is yelling their opinions at each other online. It's hard not to get sucked in.
It takes effort, but it's worth it.
Yeah.
Because in the end, how we consume and engage with media shapes not only our own views, but the political landscape as a whole. It's a responsibility we all share.
Okay, so we've established that the relationship between media and polarization is complicated and a little scary.
Yeah.
But before we go any further, let's rewind a bit.
Okay.
Why has research on this topic exploded in recent years, specifically after 2012?
It's likely a combination of factors. The rise of social media platforms like Facebook and Twitter.
During that time played a significant role.
Yeah,
The social media boom, it completely changed how people get their news and information.
it did. And with social media came echo chambers, filter bubbles,
Right.
and algorithms designed to show us more of what we already agree with.
It was a recipe for increased polarization.
It was. And then there was the 2016 U.S. presidential election,
Oh, yeah.
which seemed to really accelerate those divisions.
It felt like a turning point in how we talk about politics.
That election brought the issues of media bias, misinformation, and effective polarization to the forefront.
Yeah, of public discourse.
And it's driven a lot of the research we've seen since then.
Speaking of research, one thing that felt noticeably missing was a focus on depolarization.
Right.
It seems like most of the studies focus on how media makes things worse, not better.
You're right. We need more research on how media can be used to bridge divides,
Okay.
foster understanding, and promote constructive dialogue.
We can't just dwell on the problems. We need to explore solutions.
We do.
And that's where this deep dive gets practical because let's face it, most of us aren't media scholars.
Right.
We're just trying to navigate this polarized world and make informed choices.
Knowing that the media we consume has a huge impact.
Yeah. On our views and emotions is an important first step.
Absolutely.
The question then becomes, what do we do with that knowledge?
Right. Where do we go?
How do we use our media choices to become more informed and engaged citizens?
Right.
Instead of just getting swept up in the outrage, it's so easy to fall into that trap.
It is, but remember what we said about having agency.
Okay.
You can choose to be more intentional about your media diet.
Okay.
You can choose to diversify your sources of information.
So instead of just sticking to the same news sites or following the same people on social media,
Right.
actively seek out different perspectives, even if they make you uncomfortable.
Exactly. Challenge yourself.
Yeah.
Read articles or watch news segments that you think you'll disagree with. Listen to podcasts that present viewpoints different from your own.
Yeah.
You might be surprised at what you learn.
Okay.
And you might even find common ground where you least expect it.
It's like those echo chambers create this illusion that everyone agrees with us,
Yeah.
when in reality, there's a whole world of diverse opinions and perspectives out there.
And engaging with those diverse perspectives is essential, not just for our own personal growth,
Right?
but for the health of our democracy. If
Yeah.
we want to find solutions to the challenges we face as a society, we need to understand and empathize with people who see things differently.
There's a quote I love. The test of a first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold two opposed ideas in mind at the same time and still retain the ability to function.
Oh, I like that.
We need to apply that to how we consume media.
That's a great quote. And it's so relevant here.
Yeah.
The goal isn't to erase our own beliefs or values, but to broaden our understanding of the world
Right.
and engage in more constructive dialogue
Mm.
with those who see things differently.
So it's not about becoming neutral or apathetic. It's about becoming more informed, more empathetic, and ultimately more effective citizens.
Exactly. And that's something we can all strive for, regardless of our political beliefs.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, we're all in this together.
Well said. But all this talk about responsible media consumption makes me wonder,
that.
what about the media producers themselves?
Yeah.
What's their responsibility in all of this?
That's a great question. And it's one that deserves a deep dive of its own. Because the way media is produced and presented has a huge impact on how we see the world and each other.
So are journalists and media outlets doing enough to combat polarization? Are they part of the problem or part of the solution?
That's what we'll explore next, when we take a closer look at the media's role in shaping political discourse
Mm.
and the possibilities for a more responsible and constructive approach to covering these sensitive issues.
Sounds good. Welcome back to the deep dive. We're shifting gears now to focus on the media producers themselves. Are journalists and media outlets doing enough to address polarization, or are they actually contributing to the problem?
That's a tough question. And there are no easy answers.
Yeah.
I mean, we've already seen how media coverage of polarization can unintentionally exacerbate the issue
Right.
by highlighting those divisions
Right.
and giving a platform
Mm.
to the most extreme voices.
It's like the old saying, if it bleeds, it leads. Sensationalism and conflict seem to get more attention than nuanced discussions or attempts to find common ground.
Absolutely.
And wouldn't you say the 24/7 news cycle and the pressure to attract viewers makes it even harder for journalists to be objective?
Absolutely. Those are real challenges. And there are some, pretty valid critiques
Yeah.
of how the media currently operates.
Okay.
Some argue that the focus on profits and ratings
Yeah.
incentivizes sensationalism and clickbait headlines, which often prey on existing anxieties and divisions.
It's almost like the goal is to provoke a reaction rather than foster understanding. And then there's the horse race style of political coverage,
Oh, yeah.
which often prioritizes poll strategy and personalities over actual policy issues.
It's all about the drama.
It's like we're obsessed with who's winning or losing.
Right.
The drama, the conflict, rather than engaging with the substance of the issues.
Right. And that kind of coverage can fuel cynicism
Yeah.
and distrust in the political process,
Yeah.
which ultimately feeds into polarization.
Yeah.
People start to feel like their voices don't matter, like it's all just a game.
So it sounds like we're pointing fingers at the media here. But are they completely to blame?
I mean, it's never that simple, is it?
Right.
It's always more complicated.
Aren't there other factors at play? What about the role of politicians themselves in stoking these divisions?
Of course. It's a complex interplay of factors.
Yeah.
Politicians certainly play a role,
Hmm.
but so do social and economic inequalities, cultural shifts, and technological advancements. It's an ecosystem.
The media landscape is just one piece of the puzzle.
It is one piece of the puzzle.
Fair enough. But even if it's not the whole story, it's clear that media has an impact. So what can be done to make things better? Can media outlets actually be agents of change?
I think so. There are definitely things that can be done.
Okay.
One promising approach is solutions journalism,
Okay.
which focuses on reporting on responses to problems, rather than just highlighting the problems themselves.
So instead of just telling us how bad things are, they're also showing us what's being done to address those issues
Right.
and what potential solutions are being explored.
Exactly.
It's a more constructive and hopeful approach.
It can empower people to get involved and be part of the solution.
That's great.
There's also a growing movement towards more deliberative forms of journalism,
Okay.
which involve actively engaging citizens in the process of reporting and discussing complex issues.
Yeah.
This can help bridge divides by encouraging dialogue and understanding.
Hmm.
between people with different viewpoints.
That sounds fascinating. It's like taking the us versus them mentality out of the equation
Right.
and creating a space for more nuanced and collaborative conversations.
Right. It's about creating a space where people feel heard
Yeah,
and respected, even when they disagree.
that's great.
And then there's the potential of new media technologies to connect people across ideological divides.
Oh, okay.
For example, platforms that use algorithms to expose people to a wider range of viewpoints,
Right.
or that facilitate respectful dialogue between people who might not otherwise interact.
It's like using technology to counter the echo chamber effect. Instead of reinforcing our biases,
Right.
it's pushing us to broaden our horizons
That makes sense.
and engage with different perspectives in a more constructive way.
Exactly. So, while the challenges are significant,
Yeah.
there's also a lot of innovation and experimentation happening.
Yeah.
In the media landscape,
Okay.
there's a growing awareness
Mm.
of the need for a more responsible
Mhm.
and constructive approach to covering these divisive issues.
It sounds like there are people working on this.
There are. And it's not just coming from journalists, it's coming from the public as well.
So it sounds like there's reason to be hopeful.
I think so.
Yeah.
While there's no quick fix for polarization, the fact that these conversations are happening, that people are seeking solutions,
Yeah.
is a positive sign.
It feels like we're at a crossroads. We can either continue down this path of division and distrust, or we can choose a different path,
Yeah.
one that leads to greater understanding, empathy, and ultimately a stronger sense of community.
I agree. And while the task ahead may seem daunting, remember that even small changes
Okay.
in how we consume
Yeah.
and engage with media can have a ripple effect.
So as we move forward, armed with this knowledge, we have a choice to make.
Yeah.
Do we want to be part of the problem or part of the solution?
It's the choice we all face every day. And it's not always an easy one. But I believe that if we're willing to put in the effort
Okay.
to be more mindful, more critical,
Mm.
and more compassionate in our interactions with the media
Right.
and with each other, we can create a better future for ourselves and for generations to come.
So we've talked about, how we as media consumers can try to navigate this polarized world. But what about the media producers themselves? What responsibility do they have in all of this?
Oh, they absolutely do.
Huh.
The way information is framed and presented
Yeah.
has a huge impact on how we perceive the world and each other. I mean,
Yeah.
think of it as the lens through
Uh-huh.
which we view these complex issues.
So are journalists and media outlets doing enough to combat polarization? Or are they actually contributing to the problem?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't
It
it?
feels like a bit of a chicken and egg situation.
It is.
We've talked about how media coverage of polarization can unintentionally make things worse, even if the intention is simply to report on it,
Right.
highlighting divisions. And giving a platform to extreme voices
Yeah.
can amplify those very things.
It's tricky.
It's tricky, right? On one hand, journalists have a duty to report on what's happening,
Sure.
even if it's unpleasant.
Right.
But on the other hand, there's a responsibility to avoid fanning the flames of division.
It's a tough balance to strike.
It's exactly a delicate balance. But there are definitely aspects of the current media landscape that contribute to the problem.
Absolutely.
The pressure to generate clicks and attract viewers often leads to sensationalized headlines and a focus on conflict rather than solutions.
Right. We're drawn to the drama.
It's like we're drawn to drama and outrage, and the media knows it.
And they capitalize on that.
Do you think the 24/7 news cycle makes it even harder to kind of step back and provide context?
Absolutely. It definitely adds to the pressure. There's a constant demand for new content,
Right.
which can sometimes come
Yeah.
at the expense of accuracy and depth.
That makes sense. So what can be done if we acknowledge that media plays a role in this polarization? What are some solutions? Can they actually be a force for positive change?
I really do think they can. There are some exciting approaches being explored.
Okay.
One is solutions journalism,
Okay.
which focuses on reporting,
Yeah.
on responses to problems, rather than just the problems themselves.
Okay, so instead of just telling us how bad things are, they're also showing us what's being done to address those issues.
Right.
And what potential solutions are being explored.
Exactly.
It's a more constructive approach, isn't it? Instead of just leaving people feeling helpless and overwhelmed,
Right.
it offers a sense of hope and agency.
It does. It empowers people to get involved.
Yeah.
And be part of the solution.
That's great.
There's also a growing movement towards more deliberative forms of journalism, which involve engaging citizens.
Okay.
in the process of reporting and discussing complex issues.
Okay, so imagine bringing together people with different viewpoints to have those difficult conversations.
Exactly.
By about journalists who can help facilitate productive dialogue.
It's powerful stuff.
That sounds incredible. Instead of just shouting at each other from our respective echo chambers,
Right.
we're actually sitting down and listening to each other.
It's about creating a space where people feel heard and respected, even when they disagree.
That's great.
And it's about recognizing that there's often more common ground than we realize.
Do you think new technologies have a role to play in all of this? Can they be harnessed to bridge those divides? Or are they just amplifying the problem?
Well, technology is a double-edged sword. On the one hand, social media platforms
Yeah.
have been a breeding ground for echo chambers and misinformation.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, they also have the potential to connect people across ideological divides and expose them to a wider range of perspectives.
So it all comes down to how we use them,
Okay.
both as consumers and as producers of media.
You got it.
We need to be more mindful of how we engage with these platforms, and we need to hold them accountable for creating spaces that promote healthy discourse, rather than just amplifying division.
Absolutely.
It feels like we're at a turning point. We can either continue down this path of polarization and distrust,
Yeah.
or we can choose a different path, one that leads to greater understanding, empathy, and ultimately a stronger sense of community.
We're at a critical moment
Yeah.
in our history.
Yep.
And while the challenges are real, there's also reason to be hopeful.
Yeah.
We're having these conversations. We're recognizing the problem. And we're starting to explore solutions.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the most important takeaway for our listeners?
I would say,
What can they do to be part of the solution?
be mindful, be critical, be curious. Choose your media wisely.
Okay.
Seek out diverse perspectives, engage in respectful dialogue, and most importantly, remember that we're all in this together.
Well said. That's a great note to end on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the complex world of media and political polarization.
It's been a pleasure.
We hope this has given you some food for thought and perhaps even a little inspiration to be part of the change we want to see in the world.
I agree. I always enjoy these conversations, exploring these issues with you. And I hope that our listeners will continue to engage with these topics and be part of the solution.
Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep the conversation going.